Well, let's talk about these developments now with Gustavo de Carvalho, the senior researcher at SAIIA's African Governance and Diplomacy Program. Gustavo, good evening to you and welcome. The president in those court papers stated Russia made it clear that arresting a sitting president would be a declaration of war. It would also be against our constitution to risk engaging in war with Russia. This seems to now have been an elegant solution to a diplomatic conundrum. How big a political moment is this?
It's a very important moment. We've had for the last couple of months a very serious risk that the BRICS Summit would be shadowed by the noise of the potential visit of Vladimir Putin to South Africa. So to a large degree, I think it's the end of a very long road where we saw the South African government for already a number of months trying to find alternatives and options by engaging with the ICC, by trying to find alternatives that would not create the legal crisis. At this stage, what we do know is that option, that risk for a legal crisis within South Africa. I know the Russian government mentioned that the arrest warrant by the ICC is considered to them to be null and void, but it's not in our case. We are a signatory of the Rome Statute that created the International Criminal Court, and in that regard, it resolves many of the problems. Of course, this BRICS Summit has a lot of really important issues, and I think when we're talking about expansion, when we're talking about alternative currencies, and would have been a major risk that the results of the summit would be shadowed by the potential visit of Vladimir Putin. So I would say it is an important development for us here in South Africa, and now we can focus once again in two big events coming in the coming weeks. Next week, the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg, and then from the 22nd to 24th of August, the BRICS Summit here in Johannesburg.
Some important things you raised there, Gustavo, which talk about what is at stake, and there seems to be a great deal at stake. And I'd love for you to tease out those themes a little bit more, because we've been told that the decision for Putin not to attend was mutual. So what are likely to have been some of the considerations underpinning this decision?
Absolutely. And what we do know now is that Russia does not have a lot of countries that are friendly towards them, and South Africa being one of the very few. Creating this situation within South Africa, which would be way beyond the decisions of the presidency or even the ruling party, it does have a big reflection in terms of our own judicial system and political process. And then it seems clear to me that what has happened is that no alternative that would enable Vladimir Putin to come. And I think what the South African government has been trying for some time is to get a waiver from the International Criminal Court. This is something that within Article 38, Article 98 of the Statute of Rome that created the ICC would have been a possibility. But at this stage, it's clear that that would not be granted to South Africa. So to some extent, it maintains relations between Russia and South Africa as they are, as the status quo, and it does not create a much bigger crisis where South Africa is put in opposition with Western countries, is not put in opposition to its own legal system. So at the end of the day, it is something we've been already expecting for some time, but it's certainly very important that now we have the official confirmation from both governments that Vladimir Putin will not be coming to South Africa in August.
The opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, wanted to force authorities to effect the arrest. And as we heard, and we've just carried this in news, they are going ahead with their High Court action, which is essentially wanting to seek certainty on the executive's responsibilities and obligations under international law. What is your perspective on what would happen to this application to ensure this happens? It's to be heard on Friday in the North Gauteng High Court.
It would be quite an important point. We see within the request made by the Democratic Alliance, there was one issue was about the confidentiality of the affidavit from the presidency, and that has been resolved yesterday and today with the content of the affidavit being made public. But particularly important is that request for clarity in terms of what would South Africa do in case a situation like the al-Bashir in 2015 happens again, or even in the potential visit of Vladimir Putin to South Africa in the future. I think it is a very important aspect, considering that we already had so many difficulties in 2015 and 2016 with the aftermath of the situation of al-Bashir. And it would be important for us, on the one hand, to reflect in terms of what would happen, and then in terms of planning for future events that South Africa would get that sorted, but also in terms of what is South Africa's view of a treaty that it has signed, it has ratified it, and by doing that, it means that that treaty that it signed via the Rome Statute becomes considered as local and domestic law. So I think it's still a very important process to watch. I think there is a breather now in terms of a crisis being averted, but certainly has not resolved all of the complications that came with that potential of the visit of Vladimir Putin.
Thank you so much for helping us arrive at a point of clarity with all of these developments. Gustavo de Carvalho, who is the senior researcher at the South African Institute for International Affairs, African Governance and Diplomacy Program.